Hi, this morning I thought I'd touch on a topic that arises for all of us at some time, I'm sure. And the topic is, why are we afraid of tears? Now, working as a social worker for 20 odd years, I've had a number of people in front of me who have become tearful. And often I have been working with people in times of real stress and anxiety for them. And of course, tears are a natural part of our expressing our emotions. One of the things that always concerns me is when somebody starts to cry and they apologise. I don't know why people do that. It seems to be a sort of built-in reaction to tears, that we have some embarrassment perhaps, that we're making people uncomfortable. I don't know why we apologise, but often when we cry, we apologise. And I try not to do that myself. For anyone that follows this blog, you will know that I had 3 children, and the oldest of them, my son, Adam, passed away unexpectedly and suddenly in 2020. Now, of course, when I talk about him in any sort of detail, and even now I haven't said that much, I can feel the emotion starting to build in my voice. It's starting to get shaky, and it's just showing the emotion in my voice. And that is a natural thing as a mother talking about losing her son. But the other day I was talking to somebody about something, and I mentioned my son, and my partner in the conversation, shall we say, said to me, "Oh, Sue," she says, "don't talk anymore if it's going to upset you." And it's the same as if people say, "Oh, don't cry." Why not? Why are we not permitted to cry? Why are tears so uncomfortable for people? Tears are a natural release for our emotions, and I would be a hard mother if I could talk about my son completely lacking in emotion when I mention his name and when I mention our loss. So please try not to say to people, "Don't cry," because it's taking away in some way their ability to connect with those emotions, and those emotions are important. As I said, I have been a social worker for 20 years up until recently. Would have been retired 2 years in May this year, which seems incredible. But I have seen my fair share of tears, and I have cried my fair share of tears over the years. And it is okay to cry. It's a natural release, like I said before. And sometimes maybe we've inherited that, some of us, that British stiff upper lip where you don't cry, you don't show your emotions. And the old "but big boys don't cry" was something that was very much part of my childhood, and the social norms at the time where girls could cry, and in fact we were almost expected to cry at the drop of a hat. But boys were not permitted the same right, if you like. They were told to suck it up, man up, big boys don't cry, all that sort of thing. And I think that's a shame. Men of these generations, the current generation, and even those of us that might have grown up in the big boys don't cry era, are now perhaps, and I hope, more in touch with their emotions. It's quite funny sometimes when my husband and I are watching TV. He's a bit of a softie, he's a sweetie. And when we watch things, particularly if we see some of those programs where long-lost relatives are being sought, or somebody's seeking their birth mother or father or siblings or that sort of thing, and it gets quite emotional for them. And I can look at him and he looks at me, and we give each other a little grin and dab at our eyes and go, I'm not crying. But we know that we are just having a little bit of moistness around the eyes as we identify with these people and empathise with these people. So it's okay to cry, and I think sometimes we spend our time trying to not cry when perhaps we should be encouraged to cry. I remember talking to somebody once who'd had their partner have a significant stroke, and they started to cry, and they were apologising. And I said, never apologise for your tears. I said, they're given to us for a reason. They are a release, a way of working through our emotions. And I said, this is a big thing for you. This is not, you haven't just stubbed your toe. Your husband hasn't just stubbed your toe. He's had a major stroke, which will affect your life. So I can hear the emotion in my voice. And this is my somewhat croakier morning voice as well, as it always is first thing in the morning. But I used to always encourage people to have a cry. And they may not want to cry in front of their partner, and that's okay to a degree. I always used to offer people the opportunity to meet with me to talk about how things were for them away from the person who has actually had the health event. And that's because I wanted people to be honest and to be able to talk freely and to cry freely if they wish to. And often people would not do that in front of the partner that's had a stroke. And while I understand that they're trying to protect them, it also means that they will see this stoic, strong wife, husband, partner, whatever their designation, they will see them being tough and strong and never shedding a tear. And they may think that they have to follow suit. So for me, emotions are there for a reason. They are to be acknowledged, and often, after you've had a good cry, you often feel better. And I remember talking to somebody once about crying, and they said, I can feel that I need a good cry, but I just don't seem to be able to do it. Something is stopping me. So I would say to them, go home. And in those days, you went to a video shop and rented a video. Well, up until, it seems reasonably recently. And I said, go and get a movie out that's sentimental, that's likely to make you cry, and watch that video. And I said, in the bits that, and watching the video, which may have some poignancy, some sadness, watching that, sometimes that can unblock those tears. That a sad movie can get those tears flowing, and sometimes that's not a bad thing. And just like the people who I work with who had a stroke, those of us with a diagnosis of Parkinson's are bound to have cried a few tears along the way. Perhaps with the initial diagnosis you had a few tears, and then told yourself to get up and get on with it. And, you'd had your tears, and now was the time to move on with your life. I say, if you feel tears, if you feel sad, get in touch with those feelings and have a good cry, because often you will feel much better off. Gosh, my voice is really croaky this morning and filled with emotion. So for those of us with Parkinson's and those that support us, tears are there to help us through, I think. It can help you to get in touch with your emotions, to acknowledge that this is a tough road. And I always see it as a positive thing. In fact, when I've been sitting with people whose partner has had a major diagnosis and they start to cry, I would say to them, don't apologise. You need to cry when you need to cry. And I see it quite honestly. The people that I am more concerned about, that I work with, whether it be the patient or whether it be the person I'm working with, the person that doesn't cry is the one that worries me. That they're trying to be tough, or perhaps they're blocking out the reality of how serious this situation might be. I'm usually positive in my podcasts and my blogs and acknowledge the good things in my life, but I also try to acknowledge the things that aren't going so well. And sometimes my husband and I will be talking about something and I'll get very teary and I'll just have a teary day. But I think honestly, even if you don't know why you're crying, it's just a teary day. And it's a good thing. This is a huge deal in our lives. A huge intrusion into our lives. Disrupting the flow, disrupting our lives as we knew them, and changing it forever. And it will continuously change with this condition. So given that it's an ongoing battle that we face against this enemy that is Parkinson's, I think having the odd teary day and releasing those tears and those fears and those thoughts and talking it through with somebody, whether it be a partner, whether it be a professional, a counsellor, a social worker, anybody, releasing those tears, expressing those fears, and acknowledging how challenging this life is, to me, is a healthy thing to do. So, don't be afraid of tears. They are a gift. They are a way to wash away some of those feelings, perhaps, to put them in front of us, to give us an opportunity to talk through and work through what's behind those tears. And sometimes when I've been with people, they can be crying and laughing at the same time. And sometimes we might feel a bit silly when we're talking about something, and it might be something quite trivial, and we start to cry. And it's because somewhere in amongst that conversation was something that might have sparked a memory that had little to do with what we were talking about, but we sort of segue into the tear zone, if you like. And the thing that I try to do is to sit with somebody, let the tears flow, offer them a whacking great big box of tissues, and just listen. And sometimes we don't need to give solutions. We don't need others to give us solutions. We just need to be heard that this is hard, and we can't always be cheerful all the time, can we? So, yeah, don't be afraid of tears. Tears can be your friend. And I always feel privileged when people share their tears with me. In fact, one funny little story. When I was working with people with dementia, we had a thing called a memory group. And it just so happened that there was only men in this memory group. There's myself and I think 5 or 6 guys, 50 plus, who had early stage dementia. And one of them started talking about something and he got tearful. And then the guy next to him put his hand on his shoulder and he got tearful. And by the end of that session, every single bloke in that room was crying. And they were crying and they were laughing. And they said, we don't even know why we're crying. And, you know, we had a good talk. We talked through some of the things that were happening for them. And their wives had made a connection. These guys all had wives that went down the road for coffee. And they said to me, don't you tell our wives that we've been crying? And I said, no way. I said, you know, this is between us, but how do you feel now? And they all said that they felt better. And so I said my goodbyes to them and delivered them to their wives who took them home. And I came out of that room and I said to somebody, that was a great group. I made everyone cry. And they looked at me like I was mad. And I said, you know, men are less prone to publicly give way to tears. They're more likely to bottle it up. And every single guy in that room identified with each other and felt safe to share those tears with me and share their stories with me. And it was a privilege. And I said it was one of the best groups I'd had because they felt safe to show their tears. For Parkies and me, my journey with Parkinson's, kia kaha, be brave, be strong, be you. Be comfortable with your tears.